Federal courts put some sections of the immigration law on hold, but kept others in effect. That includes Section 7. It requires applicants for professional licenses that are U.S. citizens to prove their citizenship. It also requires agencies use a federal system called SAVE to verify an applicant's legal status. But the state's examiners of public accounts found numerous licensing boards are not complying with that section. The executive directors of both the Alabama Manufactured Housing Commission and the Alabama Home Builders Licensure Board both tell WSFA 12 News their legal counsel advised them not to comply with Section 7, even though they want to follow the law. That's because challenges to the immigration law are still pending in the courts. The Home Builders Licensure Board said it would cost a lot of money to get its systems in line, money that would be wasted if the law is thrown out. Keith Warren, who is the executive director of 8 state boards, says about half of his boards have complied.
Dragging it out doesn't help with the efficiency of issuing licenses, so we hope to have this process complete by sometime mid-fall.
Warren says checking the immigration status of people applying for licenses protects consumers as well.
If they weren't a citizen or if they were transient, we would have a hard time during the disciplinary process of locating that licensee to address the complaints that had been that we had been notified of.
We asked the governor's office for a response, and a spokesman said, quote, Section 7 of the immigration law has not been changed, and we expect state boards to comply wherever the law applies to their missions. Jeremy King went on to say the governor's office is willing to work with those boards to clarify the rules. For Today in Alabama, I'm Samuel King, WSFA 12 News.
Well, tonight, a WSFA 12 News investigation. Alabama is in the top 10 in the country for vehicles hit by trains.
Now, after digging into that dubious ranking, we have learned fewer than half of the state's railroad crossings have gates or flashing lights to warn motorists of an oncoming train. WSFA 12 News reporter Samuel King is out covering dangerous crossings tonight right here in Montgomery. So, Sam, you sifted through a lot of data and found out that some of the most dangerous crossings in the state don't even have gates, much less lights.
And Bob, part of the problem is the sheer number of crossings in Alabama, more than 6,200 private and public crossings in the state. And combine that with the fact that Alabamians drive a lot, and that equals a great potential for danger. We spoke with one mother who knows that danger firsthand. Trains are an unavoidable part of life in Jemison.
He had grew up, around these tracks, and he was familiar with the trains.
Brenda Jones's 16-year-old son, Matt, had stayed home sick from school.
And he had decided that he would wander out to get something to eat. I had left a note to tell for him to call me, and he did. And he asked me, he said, Mama, what do you want? And I told him. And so the last words, he said, I love you. And I said, I love you, and I'll see you this afternoon.
Minutes later, he was dead. His vehicle crushed by an oncoming train at an ungated crossing. She believes a gate here, just like the one farther down the tracks, would have made a difference.
The bales and the crossings, to be put up to where the assurance of people that would be more aware of it.
Getting a gate installed isn't easy. The feds send money to states to pick which crossings get them, or can just get by with other warning signals.
And the criteria look at things like traffic volumes, the types of traffic, and accident histories, a number of other things. But those are some of the biggest things in order to prioritize crossings for the available funds.
We checked federal statistics to find out which crossings had the most collisions and whether they had gates, lights, or signs. Of the 16 crossings in the state with 3 or more collisions in the last 5 years, only 2 had gates. Others did have flashing lights. This crossing on Tyson Road in Lowndes County had 3 collisions in 5 years, including one that killed 2 people. AlDOT hands out the money to install gates, but it's up to the railroad companies to install them. The $5 million the state got last year paid for 25 to 30 crossing upgrades. But that still leaves 60% of Alabama's public crossings unprotected by gates or flashing lights.
So we're making steady progress. It's a slow gain in how fast we can install active protective devices.
Even at some crossings with fatalities, like this one, the traffic counts are relatively low, so they're not as high on the priority list.
We make every effort to get the projects in place with the railroad companies so that we can get the crossing protection out there where it's needed the most.
But gates alone won't solve the problem. Operation Lifesaver works to reduce the number of deaths at railroad crossings and rights of way.
The best safety equipment is the driver that makes the right decision. And you may think you can beat that train, but one thing to think about is even if it's a tie, you lose.
Brenda Jones hopes her son's case will lead others to heed that advice.
You know, just be more cautious at a railroad crossing, look both ways, because I have looked and didn't get across. There'd be a train.
And I spoke with a CSX spokesman tonight, and he tells me that the railroad companies actually don't have the authority to install gates at crossings because gates are considered traffic control devices, not railroad traffic control devices. And he also says that CSX at least works to make sure the sight lines at railroad crossings are clear and also make sure that the horns on trains are in working order because, Bob, those are an effective safety device as well. Every week in traffic court, people come to face the consequences of driving while their licenses are suspended or revoked.
All of us in a situation, a lose-win situation, but the right thing to do is have your driver's license, that won't happen. And you have insurance, won't not happen.
Jamal Garrett pleaded guilty to driving while his license was revoked. Court records show he had 4 previous citations for driving while suspended. We asked him why he continued to drive.
Like I said, you know, you got to do what you got to do to get back and forth to work. And everybody don't, you know, everybody got cars in Alabama and Montgomery anyway, so, you know, catch me if you can. You know how it is, how everybody's attitude is, catch me if you can.
Garrett paid his fine and agreed to go to driving school so he can legally drive again. A judge told this man, Benjamin Hampton, to stop driving or else. Hampton was sentenced to probation. In court, the judge said he had 12 previous citations for driving while revoked. Hampton told us he didn't wish to speak on camera, but said he accepted the judge's ruling. That didn't stop Hampton from driving off in this car, becoming an illegal driver. These drivers driving without a valid license are breaking the law and putting others at risk.
I just think it's a disgrace. I think it's extremely selfish.
Virginia Saunders knows firsthand.
A drunk driver came flying around the corner.
What can happen when a driver whose license is revoked?
They say the impact was probably 65 miles per hour.
Still chooses to drive.
He never slammed on his brakes, tried to brake, just went full force into the back of my minivan. No license. His license had been revoked because he had 3 previous DWIs.
Her oldest child was not injured, but her youngest had a sprained neck, and that wasn't all.
It definitely took a toll and an impact on our family emotionally and financially. For the simple fact, emotionally, I had a concussion for 3 months. I was injured from the top of my spine to the bottom of my spine. So for 3 months, I really could not care for my children by myself.
And the fact the driver didn't have insurance complicated matters.
The main complication it created with him not having insurance or a license was then we had to turn to my insurance company and look to my insurance company to pick up the check and pay for all the missing pieces.
It's up to the Department of Public Safety to find these drivers and keep them off the roads.
I mean, it's dangerous for you to be on the highway and your license are suspended or revoked because something dangerous happened. You did something in order to get your license or in order for your license to be suspended or revoked, and we don't want you to put everyone else at risk.
But many people take that risk of driving without a license and getting caught. Attorney Julian McPhillips has dealt with many cases like this in his 4 decades of being an attorney.
But boy, I'll tell you what, they take a great risk when they do. And, you know, and I'm not advocating to anybody to do it, but I'm just saying you assume a great risk.
So driving while suspended or revoked has a cost, not only for those who have to pay to get their licenses and insurance back.
It will cost you, unfortunately. Insurance companies don't look nicely upon somebody's license being suspended or revoked.
But also for those like Virginia Saunders, who have to deal with the consequences of that risk.
And I just think everybody needs to step back and think about it because when you do that and you're driving without a license or you do not have insurance, it's a very selfish move because anything could happen at any time.
Not everyone who drives without a license is considered a danger on the roads. A license can be suspended for a wide range of reasons, from having multiple DWIs to being behind in car insurance or child support payments. While lawmakers feel those who are truly a danger on the roads should not have licenses, they say it can be tricky to strengthen the overall penalties. That's because in many parts of this state, there isn't a comprehensive public transportation system. We'll continue to follow this story. Samuel King, WSFA 12 News, Montgomery.
You've probably shared the road with an 18-wheeler. Over a 5-year period, federal statistics show the number of fatalities involving those big rigs remained relatively flat.
Right, 122 in the year 2005, 120 in 2010, but beginning in 2006, those numbers spiked alarmingly to 146. There were 139 in 2007, 133 in 2008. That's when Alabama State Troopers began a concerted effort to do something about these fatalities, trying to reduce the number. Tonight, in a second part of a WSFA 12 News investigation, reporter Samuel King shows us how state troopers are bringing the numbers under control.
Sydney Thomas went to prison for manslaughter after this 2003 accident that killed one teenager and seriously injured Suzanne Easdale.
And the fellow driving the truck, the wreck was on the news. And they showed him, and he was crawling around on all fours. That's how high he was on his cocaine.
Truckers are supposed to account for every single hour on the roads. Thomas could not account for a 12-hour period before the accident. He later told investigators that during that period, he smoked cocaine. He also told troopers while his truck had no mechanical problems, he did not have the documents to prove it. Logbooks are one of the items troopers check as they conduct random inspections along the state's highways. This day, they're stopping trucks on US 231 in Elmore County.
All righty. If you will pop the air, check your low air light.
The logbooks are important because they can provide clues to one of the leading causes of accidents, driver fatigue.
Finding false logs, finding where drivers are driving over the allotted number of hours they're allowed to drive during the day. And in such cases that we are placing the drivers out of service, giving them a mandatory break time that they've got to take.
The results of these random inspections are another example of how the trucking industry is taking safety more seriously. Troopers report they're finding fewer critical violations in the vehicles they stop on the roads.
Getting in this truck, according to safety, it's just like waking up in the morning not putting no clothes on. If you don't do right when you take off, have your paperwork and everything, you're going to get in trouble.
And there are few truck drivers who get in less trouble than Ricardo Jackson, the Alabama Trucking Association's Driver of the Year. He's worked for Charles G. Lawson Trucking for 24 years and has never been involved in an accident. For him, safety is second nature.
My opinion, it's all in your mind. If you want to do it, you'll do it. If not, it's just something you want to do.
His company has a pretty good safety record, too. CEO Billy Rutan says it's a top priority, even while it's hard to keep up with all of the regulations.
And it's a lot more complicated. And, you have more eyes on you. You got people with cell phones out on the road, calling in and so forth. So drivers have to be a little more alert of their surroundings.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration scores carrier companies in 5 categories. Unlike the grade on a math test or the SAT, the higher the score, the worse a company is doing in a category. Just this month, the Fed shut down BM&L Trucking based in North Alabama. It had scores of 90 plus in 3 of the key categories. A lot of companies are failing to make the grade. We found at least 100 based in Alabama that had scores in a serious threshold when it came to unsafe and fatigued driving. One even had a 90-plus score for drugs and alcohol. And that's just the companies in Alabama. Many out-of-state companies have trucks that pass through Alabama every day. During its random inspection, troopers stopped a truck registered to Ford Truckers Incorporated, based in Morganton, North Carolina. While the driver had no violations on this day, the latest federal report shows the company exceeds federal standards for fatigued drivers. While troopers and federal inspectors have stepped up their safety checks, they can't catch everyone. Suzanne Eastdale keeps that in mind as she travels highways across the South to see her grandchildren.
I'm apprehensive, and I do pray about it. And for sure, when I arrive at my destination, I'm always thankful.
And everyone we spoke with for this story agrees it's not just the drivers of 18-wheelers who are at fault here. Drivers of passenger vehicles also have some things to keep in mind. And that includes not following too closely. Allow 10 feet for every 10 miles per hour you're traveling. Also, don't linger in the blind spot. If you can't see a truck's mirrors, the driver can't see you. Also, don't hang out next to the 18-wheeler's tires. The bolts or even the tire itself can blow out, and that can be very dangerous. And above all, no distractions like texting. Keeping those tips in mind could go a long way toward reducing accidents in our state. Samuel King, WSFA 12 News, Montgomery.
Now on WSFA.com, more resources on this issue. Take a ride with Ricardo Jackson as he describes what it's like behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. We also have safety tips from state troopers and a look at the carriers who are exceeding federal standards for unsafe and fatigued drivers. That's all right now on.
We were going to Jamaica, the Grand Cayman Islands, and the Florida Keys.
Mackenzie Blackman and a couple dozen other students have been looking forward to the cruise since last August. Their parents say they booked the Carnival cruise through Southern Tours, based in Troy.
We had to pay half in payments, and then after January we had to pay the rest of it and for the bus. So my last payment was a little over $1,000.
But just days before the students were to set sail on May 29th, the group found out that Southern Tours went out of business last fall, and the group was out $26,000. Several parents we talked with say travel agent Gail Hawley kept collecting their checks, but never booked the cruise. We went to the former address listed for Southern Tours and found it empty and for sale.
It took a lot of money for this cruise for a lot of people, and now we've lost the money and we've lost the trip.
Yeah, she had letterhead, Carnival letterhead, and everything looked legit. The pamphlets, all of it looked legit.
And parents and students tell us that students here at Laverne High School booked a cruise through the same company last year and reported no problems. In a statement to WSFA 12 News, Carnival said Southern Tours made 3 bookings last summer for a cruise on May 29th. All were canceled due to a lack of payment. A spokesperson said, regrettably, there is nothing we can do in terms of protecting the reservation for this group, and the voyage in question is sold out. After learning the cruise was canceled, the parents tracked down Hawley, but they say she has made no concrete arrangements to refund their money.
Well, I would love to have the money back, or at least a cruise for my child, and you know, and this person needs to own up and, you know, and make amends one way or another.
We left 2 messages for Hawley on separate occasions, and she still hasn't returned our calls. Many of the students would still like to go somewhere after graduation, but it likely won't be on a cruise. Samuel King, WSFA 12 News, Luverne.